Holy City Center Radio is episode 210, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Friday, January 12th, 2024. Merry Friday to you all. I hope you have had a great week, and I hope the weekend ahead is even better. If you need plans, go to holycitycenter.com/events, and you can see what is going on in town, not just this weekend, but next week, next month, and beyond. All sorts of events, constantly updating the calendar, so you can check that anytime you're looking for something fun to do. Not a whole lot to talk about. Been a pretty quiet week. Lots of work, some meetings, errands, all that stuff. Nothing too exciting. It's feel like my calendar hasn't had all the fun, concerts, comedy shows, or anything like that. I guess I need to go out and do something. It's been quiet since I got back from Christmas break, but I'm not complaining. It's okay to save some money and just hang out and relax sometimes, get a little extra work done instead of, rushing to get things done before you head out. So not complaining, but yeah, just nothing fun to report on. So let's get to the news. Well, with the new year, things are picking back up into action, and that includes politics here, not just with visits from presidential candidates and things like that, but the South Carolina House and Senate are back in session and starting out the new year where they left off, pushing a lot of things that are more about culture wars than they are actually about helping people. You're about to learn where the legislature's priorities are. No surprise, if you've listened to this podcast or paid any attention to politics over the last couple of years, you will not be shocked about this. But one of the things that the GOP-led legislature is trying to just motor through is legislation relating to transgender people, specifically transgender children, adolescents, anyone under 18. They are trying to fast track different bills, and one is motoring right on through. So despite pleas from transgender children's pediatricians and parents to keep allowing those children to receive hormone therapies failed to stop Republican lawmakers from advancing a ban on those treatments to the South Carolina House floor on Wednesday. So the GOP-led Medical, Military, Public, and Municipal Affairs Committee voted to advance the bill within the first 2 days of the 2024 legislative session. At least 22 other states have enacted similar restrictions in recent Republican-led crackdowns on transgender medical care, bathroom usage, and sports participation. Are all, kind of in the crosshairs across the country and in red states and any legislatures that are, headed up by the majority of Republicans. So, yes, this is their priority. Not saying that, there are not issues that, that should be worked out or questions that need to be answered when it comes to these things. But this is the priority. And I know that we talk a lot about how, hey, there can be multiple pieces of legislation being worked on at the same time. And that is certainly true. But it just shows you culture wars are not going anywhere. This is very much something that they wanted to get passed last year, and they're working on it now. And as I said, there's actually multiple bills. But specifically right now, we're talking about House Bill H4624. If you would like to reach out to anybody in the South Carolina House, your representative, to let them know what you think about it, you can reference it by using that number H4624. So yes, they're trying to pass this through, and as I said, this is the priority of the South Carolina House Republicans. It's a very conservative issue, again, a culture war thing, but it is pitting some incumbents against primary challenges from the right, as it is not necessarily, as we know, neither party is a monolith, and people have different opinions on every issue, for the most part. So some want to be, just like we saw with the abortion battle last year, the abortion ban battle, that even within the parties, there's disagreements with how extreme they want to go. So the bill, so you can have some more details on what exactly it says in its current form, it would bar health professionals from performing gender transition surgery, prescribing puberty-blocking drugs, and overseeing hormone therapy for anyone under 18 years old. It would also prevent Medicaid from covering such care for anyone under the age of 26. Now, in addition to banning, gender transition surgery, puberty blocking drugs, and hormone therapies for minors, the bill would also forbid school employees from withholding knowledge of a student's transgender identity from their legal guardians. So that's the gist of what this bill is. We've talked about this a lot before. There are not minors having gender transition surgery. It is not recommended. It is not the norm in the country, but it was not happening here specifically at the Charleston area hospitals. No one under 18 was having that kind of surgery. Things like puberty blocking drugs and hormone therapies, those did not start until an adolescent was actually going through puberty, and neither of those are permanent. So they could stop those therapies at any point, and puberty would just go back to wherever it was when they started taking the drugs. Not instantly, of course, but these are not permanent changes. So there's that side of the things. Then, as I mentioned, they want to block Medicaid from even covering that care for anyone under the age of 26. That kind of gives the game away a little bit. It's always the children, putting aside the fact that a lot of the hyperbole around this is, children are having surgeries, when they're too young to make such decisions. That's not happening. Misinformation, disinformation that's out there, but it's all about the children. This shows you that it's not at all about the children. They know that's the easiest sell, is convincing people who, if they don't have a particular opinion on this matter, or regardless of what party they're in, they can look at this and be like, oh, they're just looking out for children. That seems reasonable to me. We talked about this a lot, not just with this issue, but politicians, both sides of the aisle, when they introduce legislation, they always give it some flowery name. So it sounds like if you oppose that legislation, it sounds like, oh, wait a minute, like someone could create legislation, like the Don't Beat Up Kids bill, and the bill has nothing to do, with assault or anything, and has something ridiculous within it. And you'd be like, no, we're not passing this bill. But, oh, so you want children to be beat up? It's one of those types of things. But this shows that it's not all about the children. That's the way for them to try to get people on their side and say, can you believe this stuff? Of course, a lot of the stuff they say is not happening, or they're giving off misinformation about the things that are happening. And the fact that they want to cut off Medicaid from covering any kind of transgender care, health care for anyone under the age of 26 shows that they're not trying to protect children. They're just coming after that community writ large. Now, putting all that aside, and I know there's varying opinions when it comes to that stuff, regardless of what the medical community says and what studies have shown, that other part of it where school employees would have to essentially out any transgender children, some people don't always quite understand that either, but opponents have said that provision, which they even called a forced outing, would place vulnerable children from unloving households at risk of homelessness and domestic abuse. Democrats also said that the move would overburden teachers who aren't trained to recognize gender dysphoria. So you have a child who is questioning their gender, or maybe they're already adamant, nope, this is who I am. Teachers would have to check if the teacher catches wind of that, or if they say like, hey, can, the name that the school has on record is not the name I prefer to go by. I'm a trans girl, boy, whatever it is, and my name is this. They would have to go to the parents and make sure they knew that this was going on with their child. And on the face, I get that. It seems to make sense. But when you actually look into it, there's a lot of families that are not welcoming to the LGBTQ community, period. And even those who might be, quote unquote, oh, I'm okay if my child is gay, but this trans stuff, I just don't get, and although we, as a society, we're getting more accepting and we're understanding things, instead of just letting biases and, misinformation from the past to rule our thoughts, there unfortunately is a lot of people who would abandon their children, kick them out of the house, abuse them, whatever it may be, if they were trans. So this forced outing could put children at risk. Now, it's hard to know the percentages of those. It could be a small percentage of families that would do something like that to their own child, but it is a possibility, and we have seen it. trans children, gay children, whatever it may be, anything that strays from cisgender, they have higher risk of these things happening, including homelessness, being abused, suicide rates. Sometimes they're just at risk for being who they are, for being assaulted in any way, shape, or form. And so this would potentially put more kids at risk. Again, demonstrating that this is not about the children; it's about the parents, their bias, their bigotry, whatever it may be. They're like, I need to know if that's my child. It's not because they care about their child. They just don't want their child to be whatever it is that they don't want them to be. If it was about protecting children, you wouldn't make teachers out them because they could potentially face dangers at home. Again, showing that it's not about children at all. Now, look, I've gotten used to some of my opinions and things I believe not being the majority here in this state. It's a very red state, a very conservative state. Yes, there's liberal pockets here and there, and there's a lot of purple areas now where there's a lot of people kind of in the middle, not necessarily agreeing with one ideology or the other. So I'm used to those things. The thing that I have a really hard time getting used to here, and this is politics in general, and I'm sure there's conservatives in states that have liberal majorities that may feel the same, depending if their legislators act this way too. But there's this hearing that happened on Wednesday, and almost 50 people testified against the bill. No one spoke in favor of the bill. And I would imagine there's plenty of emails, calls, and stuff to these legislatures' offices as well. Probably more of a chance that, they got some in support. But the bottom line is you're supposed to be listening to your constituents. You're not supposed to be letting your opinion and bias come into these decisions. It's supposed to be what's best for the community. And you represent the people. You have to do the will of the people. Now, I understand that's not always going to be the case for many reasons. And sometimes I get it. Sometimes what the people want is ridiculous. And, but with something like this, and not just the people, like just community members, there were plenty of those, parents of transgender children, but pediatricians, experts, people telling you that this is going to harm children, telling you that, hey, the misinformation you read online is not true. This is what's actually going on in these clinics and places. Like, we're the people actually there. We can tell you what the reality is. Completely, all these folks were completely ignored, and they just fast-tracked this bill and sent it to the floor. There was an instance where one of the legislators was talking about how, oh, you keep referencing all these studies that, that you say refute that we should be doing this. Like, I've never seen these studies. And someone who was speaking at the time pulled out this like comically large binder to be like, I'm glad you asked. Here they are, showing that there's a bunch of studies showing that a lot of the things they're trying to get rid of or prohibit will harm children, and that certain types of gender affirming care, not all gender affirming care. There's multiple tentacles to that, so it's not surgery and only surgery. There's all sorts of things. When it's done appropriately with making sure that, and that includes age appropriate, that includes taking the time, that includes multiple other doctors being involved, whether it's a psychologist, a therapist, endocrinologist, like it's multiple. It's a long decision. It's a long process. It's not like a child walks in, anyone under 18 walks into a clinic and says, I want a surgery that changes my gender. It does not happen. And so all these lies and misinformation online, fuel this. But it was clear even when people were speaking out against it and saying things like, hey, look, you want to talk about this stuff? Fine. But why is this your priority? We have horrible numbers in education in this state. We have horrible numbers as far as children being without food in this state. Not to mention, this state has been horrible towards women for many reasons, including violence against women has been very, very bad in this state for a long, long time. And this is what the priority is, to say nothing of other state issues, whether it's, infrastructure or whatever else. And so despite all of that, didn't matter, pushed through, don't care what experts say. This is my bias, this is my bigotry, this is my confusion and fright. It's something that's different than me. and I'm just going to go with that, and I don't care what people who actually understand this stuff say. And that's what's happening. For instance, Matt Sharp, he's senior counsel for a national Christian conservative advocacy group called the Alliance Defending Freedom, appeared virtually. He was the lone public testifier supporting the bill. And I need to circle back because I said no one supported it. I meant no one in the room. Like I said, I'm sure they got emails and they speak to people in public who support this, but no one in the room who signed up to speak supported this bill. And I think this kind of shows that they didn't even spend the time or money to bring in someone from this state, first of all. And didn't even, because he's not in from the state, they didn't even bring him in because this was a foregone conclusion. They were not going to listen to anybody. So he appears virtually. He's an out-of-state lawyer, and he claimed that children are susceptible to peer pressure and they might experience irreversible negative consequences later in life if experimental procedures, that's his words, are allowed to continue. So first of all, they're not experimental procedures. Many of these things have been around for years and years, if not decades. They're just been studied more in the last 10, 15 years to back up what they have been doing. None of this is experimental. So that's a lie right there. If not a lie, ignorance, not willing to actually look into it. So he might not have knowingly been lying, but that it's just not true. As far as peer pressure, I mean, really, are kids pressuring other kids to be trans, to be gay? Or is that really happening? No, of course it isn't. There isn't like this roaming group of bullies going around and pressuring children to become trans or be gay or be anything else on the LGBTQ spectrum. It's just not happening. And even if it was happening, you think that child is going to go through any of the gender affirming care, whether it's therapy or hormone therapy or eventually surgery after they turn 18 because of peer pressure? Like, give me a break. It's absolutely ridiculous. On the other side, non-advocacy groups like this person who obviously also has the religious bend to it, major medical groups that aren't advocacy groups, that go by science, that go by studies, major medical groups, including the American Medical Association and the American Academy of Pediatrics, endorse transgender youth care as safe when it is administered properly. Now, that's the key. It has to be done properly. There is probably some horrible story somewhere where it has been not done right, and that's wrong. And those things should be regulated just like any other medical procedure, medical care. It should be treated no differently in that sense. So it's just, they don't actually care, as I mentioned. Now, South Carolina pediatricians, again, people who see this kind of stuff daily, stress that minors in the state do not receive gender transition surgeries, which I just said. So it's not even a thing that's happening in this state. So for them to ban it, okay, it's already not happening. So if you want to say that's a ban, that's fine. The problem is that there's other forms of care that are life-saving for some of these young people who might otherwise turn to things like self-harm. It's things like regular old therapy, or seeing a psychologist. And yes, sometimes there's things like hormone therapy. But again, that doesn't, or puberty blockers. Those don't happen until the patient is going through puberty. And it is reversible. So what is the problem? In addition to all that, treatments occur with what the pediatrician said are fully involved parents, has to have their consent. So anyone under 18, their parents have to consent to any of these treatments. So if their parents think there's something up, like this made up peer pressure scenario, if that were real, and they were like, look, my kid's being peer pressured to this, they don't consent. It does, and then it won't happen. And then when the adolescent turns 18, they can make their own decisions as an adult, except, of course, if they're on Medicaid, and this bill would block them from not being able to have any gender-affirming care until they're over 26, which, again, ridiculous. If they're adults, they should be able to make those decisions on their own, just like any other quote unquote adult decision they can do when they turn 18. Now, a doctor, Deborah Greenhouse, she mentioned, this is the process, the parents' consent and all that. She's not some new liberal activist doctor. She has cared for a number of transgender children for over 30 years, which once again shows that this is not a new thing. This isn't peer pressure. This isn't people being like, I want to be trans because it's a cool, hip thing to be. Like, this is not new. It's just that the public is more accepting. They understand these things more. And so you're learning more about it. And people who in the past would have been deathly afraid to be themselves because of how they are treated by others, those folks in the past, if they live now, they might not have that same fear, or at least less fear. As we've seen, hate is alive and well in this country for multiple groups. So this isn't new. This is something she has seen professionally for more than 30 years. And again, she added that minors do not even begin taking medication until puberty begins. So you're banning, not when people hear gender affirming care, they make that leap to it's surgery or the hormone therapies and things like that. No, it encompasses a lot of things. And you want to take that away from children and adolescents. It's not about protecting the children. It's about protecting their fright, protecting their bias, their bigotry. It's because some are just outright bigots. I think some are well-meaning and they just don't understand or having a hard time. When there's something you've believed for a long time, or maybe your parents instilled in you or friends or whatever, and you start to learn that, oh, no, that might not actually be the case. It's hard to come back from that. So I say bigotry, but I'm sure there are some people who that's not really the basis of why they feel the way they do. But this bill would interfere with evidence-based, medically necessary care that is supported by physicians, those major medical associations that I mentioned before. It restricts access that will, jeopardize the well-being of a lot of kids, specifically, of course, trans youth. It denies their families the freedom to make what are very personal healthcare decisions, and let's be honest, are none of your business. And it bans gender affirming care, again, that encompasses a lot of different things, that has profound impacts on the economic, mental, and physical health of individuals in our community. Shout out to the Alliance for Full Acceptance here in South Carolina, who that last section there, I just lifted completely because I just think it was good. Bans on gender affirming care have impacts on the economic, mental, and physical health of individuals in our community. And if you care about those people, and if you supposedly care about children, you would pay attention and at least listen and have a good faith discussion, have good faith arguments about these things, take in what experts are saying, and make your decision from there. It's clear that that was never going to be the case. Despite overwhelming evidence and people objecting to this, it was a foregone conclusion, and now it moves to the House. So it's not passed. It still has to go through the House and the Senate, and you know the process. It takes a while, but it is being fast-tracked. They're ignoring any opposition to this thing, and it's just something to be aware of. And again, I know that there are people who lean left that might not agree with some of the things that I've said or whatever. But as long as you're open and listening and trying to understand, that's a completely different animal than what we're seeing from legislators in this state who have already made up their minds and they're not interested in what the public has to say. Moving on, National Nancy. Meltdown City for Nancy Mace this week. For those who didn't see, the House Oversight Committee was having a hearing about whether or not they should hold Hunter Biden in contempt of court. So for those who don't know, Hunter Biden, of course, the son of Joe Biden, he has had lots of issues in his past. He's been open and honest about his addictions with drugs and being an addict. And he's also gotten in legal trouble before. And there are legitimate reasons for him to be concerned. He is in legal jeopardy for several things. But this is about the House is a faction of the House has been trying to somehow tie Hunter Biden's business dealings to his father, President Joe Biden, which they would hope would show some sort of corruption, and then they could try to impeach Joe Biden. they wanted to speak to Hunter. They subpoenaed him to come in and testify. He said he would testify, but only would do so publicly. The House committee, led by Republicans, said, no, you only do it behind closed doors. After you've sat for the behind closed doors deposition, then maybe we'll do a public thing. That's the closest they've came, to allowing a public hearing. The fact that they don't want it to be public kind of shows what's going on here. It's easier to manipulate people's words or take things out of context when there's not a recording of it, or people didn't watch it live. And so they don't want that, of course. And so despite him offering to testify, they wanted to hold him in contempt of court because he refused their subpoena that specifically said it had to be behind closed doors. So they were having this hearing. Should we hold him in contempt of court? Should we move forward with the legal process here? And unbeknownst to anyone, Hunter Biden planned on showing up, and he did. So he showed up to this hearing and sat quietly in the gallery with his lawyer. I'm sure it was lawyers, plural, because there was a couple people with him, but I didn't recognize any of them. And afterwards, only that one lawyer spoke to the press. But in any event, he came and sat quietly while this was being discussed. For the record, not saying there won't be anything that comes of this, but so far this investigation that is trying to uncover wrongdoing by President Joe Biden has found no evidence. And this is not me spinning something. This is well reported, well documented, even on conservative networks. The commentators and things have said, like, they haven't shown us anything yet. So there's been no evidence of anything even remotely close to being illegal or even like minorly improper concerning President Joe Biden. Specifically, they're looking at the time when he was vice president. So there's like some business deals that Hunter had, and they all are back at that time frame or after he was out of office, in addition to that. So that's the background to this. So shows up at the hearing, and a couple people, Nancy Mace in particular, just melt down over his appearance there. Name calling, trying to get her viral moment. We've talked about this before. Her former staffers have talked about how she's National Nancy, meaning she's just more interested in being on TV, having viral moments, being in the news. And she's had numerous staffers leave. Go back to the old episode. You could look at this. Well, she wasn't about to let this pass her by. So she went out there and tried to get that quote that was going to give her the attention she so desperately wants. And she got it. She's getting it, but not all of it's good. But we also learned from that old article from the past episodes that she doesn't care about negative press either. She said, quote, "You are the epitome of white privilege, coming into the oversight committee, spitting in our face, ignoring a congressional subpoena to be disposed. What are you afraid of? You have no balls," end quote. She then doubled down later in several tweets. She also claimed on Twitter that Hunter ran as fast as he could after she confronted him because Hunter Biden left the oversight committee. Blatantly false. I mean, it was on TV. You can see it. He walked out when Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia started speaking. He left at that point because she, in previous hearings, had shown nude photos of him that they found on his laptop. They had nothing to do with anything, and she's basically posting revenge porn during a government proceeding. And so he obviously is not fond of Marjorie Taylor Greene. So when it was her turn to speak, he said something to his lawyer quietly. They got up and left. That's why he left. It had nothing to do with Nancy Mace, but she wanted to take credit with, her fans. And it was me. I chased him away. He's scared of me. Not true at all. When someone on her committee started interrupting her, when she was making some claim, she yelled out, "Are women allowed to speak? Are women allowed to speak?" Which, yes, you were just speaking. Everyone has spoken. Yes, he interrupted you. Call him out for interrupting you, but let's not turn this into something it's not. It was just a circus. Afterwards, that white privilege comment of hers got some backlash from folks, including a black congresswoman who said she was offended by it. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, also pointed out that Mace helped lead the Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Subcommittee, but then also helped to disband it when Republicans took majority in the House, which she said really kind of gives the game away. So when you're talking about white privilege and being concerned about that, but then you dismantle the Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Subcommittee, do you really care about those kinds of things? So, but that's not all. Yes, those were Democrats calling her out. I'm no fan of her, so that's no surprise there. But even commentators on places like Fox News were calling her out, saying that some of her comments were inappropriate, unbecoming of a member of Congress, things like that. One person even said, like, hey, there was multiple issues from today's hearing, that this is a Republican network talking about Republicans and conservatives, and listed off like what parts of the hearing went wrong, just like giving advice, like these are the things they did wrong, these are the things they could have done better. But her number one issue with the hearing, she just said Nancy Mace in general. Like, so it's not like this partisan thing. She's getting attacked from both sides, and she'll tout that as her being someone who speaks her mind and she's an independent, but that's not really the case at all. When you're being called out for your conduct, not like your votes, it's one thing for Republicans to be mad at her for like voting for Democrats when they're not. No, when they're calling you out for your behavior, that's not because you're independent. It's because they think you're doing things that are unbecoming of a congressperson. So anyway, check the link in the show notes. You can get all the details about, if you want more background on the hearing and what exactly happened, instead of just the focus on one of our representatives from the state. I encourage you to do so, and also look up what some people are saying about her behavior in particular in that hearing. All right, that'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. I hope you had a fantastic week. Enjoy your weekend. Go to holycitycenter.com/events to see what is going on in town. Thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins for producing this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio. And also big thank you to Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show. Big thank you to all of you. Please subscribe, rate, and review whatever you can do on the platform you're listening on. Please do that. It helps out the podcast. You can also go to patreon.com/holycitycenter to sign up for one of those support tiers. And lastly, please vote for Holy City Center. I should say nominate. We're in the nomination phase. Nominate Holy City Center in the Charleston City Paper's Best of Charleston 2024. Nominate or awards, which are currently, as I said, in the nomination process. I would appreciate it. Have a fantastic weekend. I'll talk to you all on Monday. Until then, good night and good luck.